success. There were some rough times for Richard, but he was assured of the prayerful support and the mighty hand of God, which made the world of difference during those times. It is fitting now that we should give thanks to Almighty God for enabling him to bring this matter to a fitting conclusion. From the words of the psalmist in the Psalm 119, verses 41 to 48, word, thank you for its use in the many languages and dialects of the world, as we seek to convey knowledge and to understand each other. Thank you for the association of word and flesh, and more especially word, may ultimately lead to a better understanding in every culture of that word, and the word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. We thank you for this contribution of Richard, assisted by Jeanette, their family, and other members, and may your blessing be upon them and this work to grant them even greater success in the years ahead. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, Archdeacon Springer. Excellency, the Acting Governor General of Barbados and Lady Williams, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers of Government, Excellency, the British High Commissioner and other ambassadors and other members of the Diplomatic Corps, Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Youth Affairs and Culture, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, Principal of the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill, distinguished guests, members of the Allsopp family, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. This is an extremely happy occasion because I welcome you. Richard Allsopp is, of course, the man of the moment here. And we are here in celebration of his work and of his presence. Equally, we honor the presence of Jeanette Allsopp, his wife, the companion in his intellectual work, and the author of the supplement to the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage. These two people have given us much to be encouraged, even excited about. And it is my pleasure to be here and to introduce you to the speakers and to launch this book.
Excellencies, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Professor Pine Timothy has told us, this is indeed a proud moment we could recognize for Richard and Jeanette and the members of the family who know what this effort has been about over many years. It's also a proud moment for the members of the University of the West Indies and for the University of Guyana, who at various times have been associated with the development and implementation of this project. On that note, we are particularly pleased to recognize in the audience Vice Chancellor Professor Dennis Craig of the University of Guyana, who is visiting with us this week and found it possible to be here. Professor Craig's association with the project, I think we need to note, does not really relate. As one of the leading members of the family of linguists at the University of the West Indies, he was one of the persons that were there in the beginning, together with Helen Pine Timothy and a number of others, effectively willed him on at every stage of the course. And it's a pleasure to have them both with us this are celebrating the launch of a landmark work, which is the end product of several years of painstaking research, sustained scholarship, and much interaction between informants in just about all English-speaking countries of the region, and the principal researcher and author, Dr. Jeanette Allsopp. The author has reminded us of certain impulses when we get around to reading the preface of the dictionary. He's reminded us of certain impulses that have led to the establishment of the Caribbean Lexicography Project, out of which this dictionary has sprung. One of the earliest of these was a resolution passed at the conference of the Caribbean Association of Headmasters and Headmistresses held at Easter 1967 in Trinidad. The resolution read, "Whereas the general interchange of teachers among the Caribbean territories is increasing, be it resolved that this association request the appropriate department of the University of the West Indies to compile a list of lexical items in each territory and to circulate those to schools for the guidance of the teacher." These are impulses which effectively called attention to needs, which ultimately he sought to respond to in a comprehensive work. He goes on to point out that the university's Caribbean Language Research Program, funded by Ford Foundation beginning in 1971, provided an opportunity for him to introduce and initiate as part of that program the Caribbean Lexicography Project. A university's output critically depends on its success in recruiting, retaining, and supporting the efforts of good quality staff and students. Lexicography is a discipline that tests the mettle of a scholar. It has been our good fortune to have in the University of the West Indies for many years, because in fact, as I returned to Barbados in 1964, Richard had preceded me and had taken up office is one of probably the first academic to have been appointed to what was then the College of Arts and Science here in September of 1963. And therefore he has labored over this period, not only on this project, but effectively in providing leadership in the use of English across the campuses, being a pioneer in the development of the discipline linguistics, again in concert with the colleagues, some of whom I mentioned, across the 3 campuses, and doing more than his fair share of administration at a number of levels. It has been our good fortune to have had the colleagueship of Richard Allsopp. And we must note that effectively the design of this project and the direction of it has been mainly his. The university is indebted to many agencies which have made substantial contributions to the execution of this project. On the funding side, we must mention among these the Ford Foundation, Barclays Bank International, American Council of Learned Societies, the governments of Barbados, of Guyana, of Trinidad and Tobago, who have made direct financial contributions, the International Development Research Center, IDRC, out of Ottawa, UNESCO, and the Commonwealth Foundation were some of the principal agents that provided funding for it, direct funding, that is. Apart from the provision of direct funding, however, the important task of data collection benefited from a generous and sustained effort from a much wider cross-section of the Caribbean community. The acknowledgements which the author characteristically, because anybody who knows Richard would know that he would not omit to acknowledge assistance that he'd got along the way, and they can be found on Roman pages 12 to 16, so I will not repeat them here, but he's recorded in that preface to the dictionary, and when we look at them, they read effectively like a comprehensive list of important institutions and knowledgeable persons across the Anglophone community of the Caribbean. It's a special pleasure, Madam Chairman, for me to identify and extend a special welcome to Mr. John Simpson, Chief Editor of the Oxford Dictionary. Oxford University Press has added this dictionary of Caribbean English usage to its impressive list of dictionaries of English usage across the world. Earlier today, when Dr. and Mrs. Allsopp joined me to welcome Mr. Simpson to the Cave campus, we discussed effectively what has been uppermost in our minds ever since the publication of this issue. That is our concern that a special effort be made at this time and over the several weeks and months to ensure that the dictionary is read, and that it is read by the people of the Caribbean, and particularly students and scholars, for we see it, as I'm sure Dr. Allsopp will be reminding us, as by no means the end, but the end of phase one of a process that will be greatly assisted. We gratefully acknowledge the support which the governments of the region have given. I also acknowledge the presence of the Secretary General, Dr. Edward Carrington, who, apart from the commitment of his office to the project, has always demonstrated a strong personal commitment to the goals and objectives of this project. It's a pleasure for me, therefore, on behalf of the university, to extend a hearty welcome to each and every one of you. This is a special moment for Richard Allsopp and Jeanette and the members of the Allsopp family. We join him in this celebration. To Dr. and Mrs. Allsopp, I offer our heartiest congratulations. I know how keen you are to obtain feedback on this important work. This work was always seen as laying the proper foundation for further lexicographical studies in the Caribbean. The university must ensure that the research agenda in this area build on the foundations which have been well and truly laid in this important issue. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed with a great degree of pride and admittedly a little relief that I join you this evening in this unique ceremony for the launching of this important work. After some near 25 years of working and waiting, working and hoping, working and promising, Dr. Richard Allsopp's magnum opus, the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage, is with us. My very first and most profound sentiment is to say to you, Dr. Allsopp, and to his colleague in this monumental task, his wife, Janet, well done, thou good and faithful servants of the people of the Caribbean. Heartiest congratulations. Yours. For what else could have driven man for nearly a quarter of a century in such a single-minded manner to devote all his energies, all of his working hours, all of his considerable intellect and talent, and that of some of those closest to him, to a single project, holding workshops in some 22 territories, assembling data from over 1,000 written sources of Caribbean literature, including all our major Caribbean authors, reviewing innumerable magazines, pamphlets, and newspapers, and then proceeding to prepare a dictionary in which he surveys over 20,000 words and phrases from a region extending from his own native Guyana and the South American mainland throughout the Anglophone Caribbean archipelago including the Bahamas, onto Belize in the Central American mainland. It had to be a labor of love, nothing less. Dr. Allsopp's labor of love, all 697 pages of it, is a unique and a most significant asset for the Caribbean. Undoubtedly the most comprehensive inventory of the linguistic environment of the peoples of the English-speaking Caribbean, this seminal work of Richard Allsopp and his wife, Jeanette, provides information which is as much cultural, historical, educational, and geographical as it is linguistic. It is therefore of great significance, not only to the Caribbean linguists, but even more importantly, in my view, through its accessibility and easy reading to the general Caribbean public. This feature of regionality, as it were, which not surprisingly concerns me most, also makes the work what Dr. Allsopp is yet to claim, that is, a potentially most useful instrument in the process of integration of the Caribbean peoples. In that regard, ladies and gentlemen, I am reminded that this great work is also not without its amusing dimension. Dr. Allsopp illustrates, for example, that across the region one can use the word lick with some 36 different meanings or shades of meaning. To lick the ice cream, this is to taste it generously. To lick the child is to beat the child. To lick back is to knock away. But to lick up is to destroy. To lick out is to dislodge. But to lick off is to remove violently. To lick in is to smash. To lick past is to go past at high speed. And to lick your mouth is to gossip indiscriminately. To fire a lick is a sharp blow, and licks like fire, licks like Lisbon, and licks like peas is simply plenty licks. Thumbing through the work also reminds me of one comic's recent diagnosis of the reasons for the slow progress in Caribbean integration. He said, when at the councils of the Caribbean community, the Trinidadian refers to his sapodilla as being the most delicious fruit in the Caribbean, and the Jamaican says, you never ever tasted a naseberry. And the Dominican says, what are these two talking about? You should taste a sapoti. And the Bahamian says, none of them can match a dilly. They are all speaking about the same fruit without knowing it, he said. If this comic's diagnosis is anywhere near correct, and who am I to doubt, perhaps now with the aid of Dr. Allsopp's dictionary, our Caribbean meetings will go faster, and we should see more progress in integration. A way to the future for the region. It carries a French and Spanish supplement, which I'm sure will particularly delight my colleague, the Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States, as we seek to create an effective association of Caribbean states stretching across all the linguistic divides of the Caribbean region. Richard and Jeanette, their summa magnum opus is perhaps yet to come. I only hope that we could expect it in under 20 years. This concern for the future progress of the region in this area must lead us to contemplate what next for this seminal work on the lives of the people of the Caribbean and for its likely successors. It is my own personal view and hope that the effort will be given greater sustained support than it has so far had from the Caribbean community in general, from individual member states, from key regional institutions like the university, from the private sector, and by my own CARICOM Secretariat. Most importantly, it is necessary that this work be made easily available to our universities, our schools, as well as to the general public. How this will be achieved, and I get a projected price of some £50 per copy, emphasizes the need all the more for the regional public and private sector support. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, this and such other related works as may follow need a secure and hospitable home. Perhaps, who knows, as vital pillars in a future Institute of Caribbean and Latin American Affairs. For the beginning, which this work represents, needs to be expanded, as it already promises to do, to cover the wider Caribbean that we are trying to build. Indeed, we in CARIFORUM are already seeking within our financing arrangements with the European Union under the Lomé IV Convention to win some material support to this end. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that Richard Allsopp, by providing what has often been described as the most comprehensive lexicon of Caribbean English usage in the history of the Caribbean peoples, has ensured that his work shall be the foundation on which future progress in this field of development of the Caribbean peoples shall rest. He has thus immortalized himself in the field of Caribbean linguistics. To him and to his wife and devoted colleague Jeanette, go the congratulations of the entire Caribbean community. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the publication of a dictionary which thoroughly describes a variety of English for the first time is an event of both regional and international significance, and such an event happens only rarely. In fact, we're lucky to be experiencing at the moment what may well be looked back on as something of a golden age of lexicography or dictionary making. The Dictionary of American Regional English is well underway in the States. Oxford University Press has been fortunate enough to have recently published the Australian National Dictionary and will soon be publishing the Dictionary of South African English on historical principles and a Dictionary of New Zealand English. In France, the monumental Trésor de la langue française is complete. In America, the Middle English Dictionary is nearing completion. In Canada, the Dictionary of Old English is getting well into the alphabet. And in England, the comprehensive revision and updating of the Oxford English Dictionary is making steady progress. The achievement of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage by Richard and Jeanette Allsopp and their colleagues stands alongside these other major lexicographical enterprises and is a credit to them and to the University of the West Indies. The international significance of its publication cannot be overemphasized. English will be recognized, Caribbean English will be recognized as a complex and independent member of the list of world Englishes as a result. One aspect of this international significance will be revealed as other dictionary makers suddenly realize that they have in the past been too complacent. Caribbean facts have been wrong in their dictionaries because there has been no readily available reference work in which they can be verified. Names and words and senses of words in Caribbean English have been overlooked through ignorance, even though they're often encountered outside the West Indies themselves. The social and cultural integrity of the islands can be examined through their language, and the differences between, say, Jamaican and Barbadian English can at last be analysed from a position of strength. I can speak with some feeling about the work of a lexicographer. There is so much information to collect, so much analysis to be done, so many willing and sometimes dilatory contributors to cajole. The basic work carries on underground for years before the final publication. In the introduction to his seminal Dictionary of Slang, the late Eric Partridge wrote in 1937 of This dictionary, at which I have worked harder than I hope, but should not swear I shall ever work again. Earlier in the century, Sir James Murray, the founding editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, had written to a friend in 1904, "I wonder sometimes whether anybody will ever realise the work that the dictionary costs. But I do not seem to care. I know, when it pleases me, at any practical amount of work, to set up the facts and force them to yield their secret." Even on publication, the concern continues. Dr. Johnson knew well enough that every other author may aspire to praise, the lexicographer can only hope to escape reproach. But lexicography is also fun, and there's an enormous sense of achievement when the work is complete. I remember once, several years ago, when we were working on the Caribbean term skank for the Oxford English Dictionary editions volumes. I'd asked the dub poet Benjamin Zephaniah if he'd be kind enough to describe skanking to me, as I really hadn't the slightest notion what it meant. He said that he could, but that he'd prefer to demonstrate it. As a result, one day he drove over to the dictionary in Oxford from London and skanked in my office. While I sat there, pencil in hand, to document the event. Lexicography is not just a dry book subject. Reading through the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage reminded me too that developments in one country may be surprisingly paralleled by developments in another. The OED does not contain this use of the noun borrow. You could give me a borrow of your iron. I've taken an example from Richard's dictionary. But the usage is quite normal, if very informal, in British English also, comparable to give me a lend of your iron, and similar colloquial expressions. National dictionaries are not simply intended to be repositories of proper speech. If a term is not just a one-off usage, but is backed up by evidence of continued use at whatever level of formality, then it qualifies for inclusion. The establishment of such evidence is the reason behind the OED's International Reading Programme and of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage's painstaking analysis of Caribbean written sources and surveys of speakers of Caribbean English. If you look in the dictionary, you'll see that there are 40 pages of bibliography listing about 1,000 works that have been read and carded for the dictionary. I mentioned earlier that the revision of the OED is making steady progress. The first edition of the OED was published over a period of 44 years, from 1888 to 1928. Despite supplements produced in the years following, and a second edition published in 1989, which incorporated these supplements, it's never been revised completely until now. It's an immense task that we're engaged on, covering all varieties of English and potentially all subject areas, from the Middle Ages up to the present day. In retrospect, it was a mistake not to start the revision as soon as the first edition was completed. Our files are full of earlier attestations for the use of terms submitted by scholars over the past century. When I left Oxford last week, I just revised the entry for Maypole, including an earlier reference to the term from the early 16th century, and revising the definition substantially, as the Victorian editors had glossed it in such a way that the Maypole was described as they knew it at the time, oblivious to the simpler Maypole, devoid of folksy ribbons, familiar to the 16th and 17th centuries, and maybe elsewhere in the world today. Changes like this are central to the slow and steady work of lexicography, and, like Richard's work, result in a more scholarly and accurate analysis of the vocabulary and syntax of a language, and one which appropriately reflects 20th century scholarship. Although the full 20-volume OED is only now undergoing its first major revision at Oxford, the familiar smaller dictionaries, being smaller, have been constantly revised and kept up to date. The shorter, in its new edition 2 years ago, is still shorter than the OED, but the pocket has expanded so much that it would nowadays only fit into a giant's pocket. And still smaller dictionaries have crept into the family below it. We're often told that we should rename the pocket, which admittedly, even in 1911, when it was first published, would have distorted even the largest schoolchild's pocket. But we retained the hierarchy, shorter, concise, pocket, little and mini, as are all by now familiar terms. The irony is that the compact disc version of a full OED is smaller than all of them. Nowadays, people expect so much information in so little. The Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage will lead us, I'm sure, to expand the size of the OED, the shorter and of course the pocket, still further. It's never too late to assimilate new information. I've already reminded my senior editors on the OED that they should not revise a Caribbean entry without consulting Richard Allsopp's work, and the OED will be stronger for it. The consistent use in the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage of the term Caribbean English means, I think, that we shall have to replace the rather old-fashioned label West Indian English with a now familiar term Caribbean English, and within that broad term we shall be more able to localise usages to particular islands or groups of islands. We already have entries for many modern Caribbean terms, dread, loverish and macome, either in print or in draft. Either because we've found them well attested in Caribbean sources or in British sources containing Jamaican or other Caribbean speech. But now we should be able to be more precise in our definitions and descriptions. I've spoken mainly about the international significance of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage as it occurs to me, but its publication is especially a cause for celebration in the Caribbean itself. It doubtless contains many words which you'd never have expected to find in a proper dictionary. But that simply illustrates the nature of language. It's not always formal. Modern lexicographers turn over the stones they find on the linguistic beach and report their findings at every level of language: formal, informal, standard, non-standard, comic and serious. And language reflects culture, we'd hardly expect otherwise. I happen to mention at home that there was not as much cricket in the dictionary as I would have expected. I was met with stifled laughter from my wife and elder daughter, who immediately felt a recitation of Wendy Coates' comic poem, "There Isn't Much Cricket in Hamlet," which suggests a view held by many that there are more important things in life. I should say that on closer inspection, I did find there is more cricket squirreled away in the pages than I first thought. All that remains for me to say is that Oxford University Press was proud to have been chosen as the publisher of this excellent dictionary, and to congratulate the University of the West Indies for supporting the project stoutly, along with the other funding agencies, over its long gestation. You'll find that it's been worth the wait, and that you'll benefit in your turn from the international acclaim which the UWI Caribbean Lexicography Project will undoubtedly receive. I must also offer my own sincere congratulations to Richard and to Jeanette, and to the many other contributors, for producing not a pistarcle, but the father of all Caribbean dictionaries.
Language defines us as a people, and the language spoken in the Caribbean, English though it might be for the most part, exemplifies the richness of our cultural heritage and distinguishes us throughout the diaspora as one people from one specific geographic location. I am honored to be here tonight and to be associated with the launching of what can only be described as a landmark in the educational and cultural tapestry of the Caribbean. Indeed, the launching of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage is quite significant for us as a people. Together, we can now lay claim to an important lexicographic work that weaves the common threads of our collective history and ever-evolving futures. From the lilt and sway of the words of the Francophone Caribbean to the flat, harsh, and sometimes guttural tones of the Anglophiles, words the etymology of which can be traced sometimes to sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes to other regions of the world, Dr. Richard Allsopp has compiled for us a volume that in itself speaks of the quality of the human resources of our region. Nearly 2 years ago in this same hall, I spoke of a need of the people for the Caribbean to move away from simply being consumers of goods and services, indeed from being follow patterns. Words used in Barbados and Guyana, I am told, to be true craftsmen of our fates and masters of our own destinies. Today, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we are continuing that journey. If we are to move forward as a region, we must embrace what is indeed truly indigenous to us as a people. Our language characterizes who we are, the way we express ourselves, the way we seek to explain things, the way we seek to offer advice, and even the way we admonish. The words we use, while English, are uniquely ours in terms of expression, and they are as much part of the global landscape as each of us is. Language has often been described as a tool of empire. And for us in this region, it has certainly been our experience. It was the tool used to subjugate us as a people, to create negative self-images, to create institutions among us which would alter the way in which we relate to one another, as family, as communities, and as a country. Indeed, it foisted another culture upon us. Our challenge as a people must be to separate the scars of that experience from the utility of the process, and to be bold enough to chart new courses and develop new markets by use of the very process that allows our language to recreate in other people's minds clear pictures of who we are and what we are about. For in so doing, ladies and gentlemen, we will be able to develop those markets for trade in goods and services that will lead to a strong and secure foundation for us as a region. It is imperative, therefore, that there exists a dictionary such as this one, not only for ourselves as Caribbean people at home and throughout the diaspora, but for all those who seek to interact with us in this global village. Dr. Allsopp has risen to the challenge to compile a work that will enable others to understand us, much in the same manner as dictionaries have been compiled to explain the language of the French, the Spanish, the Arabic, the Japanese, and we're told by the previous speaker, and see here for ourselves, indeed, Australia, South Africa, Pakistan, and other regions. But most important about all of this is the fact that Dr. Allsopp has delivered. To you, sir, I say that yours has been a crusade, a journey towards a seemingly unattainable goal. Your effort, for almost half a century, was one of sheer persistence, constant research, and unfailing support from your wife, your family, and others. Today, we see it, and we realize in a very graphic way the obstacles which you faced of limited financial resources, staff, and facilities. Indeed, these really, however, diminish in importance as we hold before us this tangible evidence of your effort. It is also necessary that those who supported you along the way, particularly the University of the West Indies, the governments of the region, the various foundations that played an integral role in funding in the early stages, that they should receive also the highest commendation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Barbados observed recently that this dictionary has truly been a labor of love for Dr. Allsopp. While this may be true, its genesis emerged from the need to document those Caribbean words, phrases, and idioms that speak to who we are as a people. Those words, whether formal or vernacular, patois, broken English, dialect, or whatever they may be called, are colorful and attractive, full of the rays of the sun on the backs of our ancestors, the ebb and flow of the tide on our shores, the gentle sway of the palm trees on our landscapes. Indeed, our collective experiences that make us one, though many. The significance of this work lies also in the fact that it paints so many pictures of how we interact. It speaks not only to our unique linguistic features, but serves as a unifying cultural force and guidepost towards regional cooperation and unity. This, Madam Chairman, is practical evidence and not mere talk of a vehicle that could be used to induce the almost elusive dream of Caribbean integration. For it has brought together the threads of our history and woven this mixed heritage of our people in a tapestry that is colored with words from Africa, such as Anansi and Katai and Harriers, or Kerfuffle from Britain, or Washington, and for those of you who like to play lotto in Trinidad, Weiwei from China. And indeed, the Indian influence on words that we use, such as roti, pelao, and dugla. But what about the origins of words such as juve, crapaud, and mauvais langue from the French? Unless we forget the Amerindians, who knew of Morbi long before we did. Or indeed, the Portuguese, who perhaps, recognizing the inevitable mixing of races that was to be the future of the region, gave us the word mulatto. I bet you that other than Dr. Allsopp and his wife, none of us in here would even have believed that the word gravel had its origin in the Dutch regions. Dr. Allsopp, being Guyanese, living in Barbados for much of his adult life, teaching at a regional tertiary institution, and during that time has fashioned the lives of countless Caribbean persons from as far south as his native Guyana to the Bahamas in the north and even beyond the region. This is ample testimony, I submit to you, of his commitment to regionalism and his right to be referred to as a true Caribbean man. Decades ago, he embarked on this journey that has today culminated in what we have before us. His opus is truly an invaluable effort, and I dare say that knowing Dr. Allsopp as I have known him in the last few years, this work has not ended. I believe that in the coming years, invariably, there will be updates and revisions, and new editions will be published. This edition, in fact, reflects how the language of the Caribbean has evolved dependent on our circumstances as people. It is true that some aspects of the language will always remain constant, for nothing else can better communicate all the nuances found in the phrase "Brigadam Brown," onomatopoeic as it is, indicating that not only that something or someone has fallen, but also the intensity with which they have fallen. Or what about the phrase, that graphic expression, "willows," which, depending on its usage, will communicate surprise, disappointment, grief, or even relief, and might even paint for you a picture of a woman banding her belly as she exclaims. There are, however, some words that reflect an era gone by. There are very few young people, including myself, who will know what we speak when we refer to a smut lamp, or who would ever have had the experience of a chicken from walking barefoot as a young child. But then, there are also words which, while reflecting that historical perspective, retain a validity for us in our lives today, because they so aptly describe what we are trying to communicate. What can better express your desire for someone to ease up off of you than telling them that they're behind you like a slave driver? Or indeed to speak of that ultimate recognition of loss, particularly of time and money, than to say that it has gone into Max Reform. But then again, Dr. Allsopp, you went to press. before you might be able to teach most people in here, in this room and beyond, why someone of the fairest sex would be so offended that she might say, "Don't call me that," when referred to as a sketel. I, of course, would not wish to include in this brief description of phrases found in your lexicon that word called yard fowl. For fear that I might be accused of throwing out some scratch grain to gather that species of bird around. The importance of this dictionary, ladies and gentlemen, and its timely publication at this period in our development should not be lost to those of us charged with the responsibility of educating our people so that they are truly prepared to embrace the dawn of a new millennium. And I'm therefore glad that this launching should come on the eve of the CARICOM Ministers of Education and Culture meeting, because it is critical that each of us who participates in this meeting takes a strong policy decision that this book must adorn the walls of each primary and secondary school in our country. Our vision in using this book must not be limited simply to acquaint ourselves of what we speak of within the region, but must be seen as a launching pad for that great vision which must be ours as a region, to be able to give to the world the story which is ours to tell and theirs to listen to, and one which bears relevance to their experience, now facing, as they do, the global prospect of continued ethnic conflict, and indeed our fact that we remain in the world one of the few regions that has managed ethnic conflict with relative peace and stability. I also wish to challenge the public and private sectors to play their role in the continued usage as well as the updating of these works, because we simply cannot leave it to those who may have to struggle and be forced to work another 20 or 30 years to produce what really must be the next edition of this work. But the challenge goes further. It must go to the teacher in the region. It must go to the parent in the region. It must go to the guardian in the region. And I don't mean the guardian of Australia. It must go, that wasn't meant for your job. It must go to the students in the region. You must not only add this dictionary to the volumes on the shelves in your library as parents, as students, as teachers, as guardians, but you must read it as you would any other piece of literature. You must refer to it in order to become familiar with the words of a neighbor, a friend, or a colleague. It is not simply Dr. Carrington for the leaders to refer to it in CARICOM meetings. By so doing, each of us would be increasing our knowledge of the words used throughout the Caribbean and advancing the cause of regional language education. And by acquiring a copy of Dr. Allsopp's work, we would also be preserving important lingual aspects of our cultural heritage. Dr. Allsopp, perhaps your most singular contribution to the people of the Caribbean are these words indelibly printed on the pages of this literary work. For I see it not only as a listing of words, but a story of who we are as a people, of where we must go as a people, and what we must do to reach there as a people. As Hippocrates said, the chief virtue that language can have is clearness, and nothing detracts from it so much as the use of unfamiliar words. The compilation of this dictionary of Caribbean English usage is an achievement that must not go unrecognized. for it is a reference point for those who would wish to be familiar with our words and with us as a people. Indeed, it is an affirmation of the legitimacy of our language, one that would not have been found 20, 30, or 40 years ago, just as banjo and calypso music did not gain acceptance then. And we perhaps tonight can respond to Louise Bennett, or should I say Miss Lou, who once said, they say that English language derived from Latin, and we language is a corruption of English. What I want to know is how come them derive and we corrupt? Miss Lou, whether we derive or we corrupt, I say to you tonight, we arrive. On behalf of all Caribbean people, Dr. Allsopp, Mrs. Allsopp, your family, the Lord bless you.
It is my great pleasure and privilege this evening, and on this historic occasion, to address you in my capacity as the editor of the multilingual supplement to the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage. First of all, it is fitting that I should offer my deepest thanks and express my sincere appreciation to my husband for permitting me to share with him in this most intellectually challenging, exciting, and inspiring work, and also for permitting me to give of my own experience and expertise, first as a secondary teacher of French and Spanish at my alma mater, the Bishop's High School in Georgetown, Guyana, then as a university lecturer in Spanish in Guyana and in the United States, and finally as a trainer of both graduate and non-graduate French and Spanish teachers here in Barbados. I should also like to express my deep gratitude to the French and Venezuelan embassies for their tangible support during my work on the supplement, which came in the form of books, journals, and videotapes and other similar material, as well as subsidized travel to Martinique and Venezuela, where both embassies were kind enough to put me in contact with people in universities doing similar work in those countries. And now to my remarks for this evening. They will focus on three main areas. First of all, I wish to establish the raison d'etre for the supplement, pointing out why it is not inconceivable that a French and Spanish supplement should accompany a dictionary of Caribbean English usage. Secondly, I wish to elaborate briefly on the utility of the supplement in the educational system of the region, as well as in the tourist sector, and to give a brief idea of how it should be used in conjunction with the main dictionary. Thirdly and finally, I wish to draw attention to the fact that the supplement is but the preliminary to a much larger work in the form of a Caribbean multilingual dictionary, and to request support for ongoing work on it. I think that there can be no doubt in anyone's mind that when we use the word Caribbean at this particular point in our development, we cannot simply mean the Anglophone Caribbean, but must of necessity also include both our Francophone and our Hispanophone neighbors. That is the reality of our Caribbean region, whether or not we like to admit it. So that I see the supplement as more than simply a reference guide, but as the embodiment of our Caribbean reality. Furthermore, Caribbean English itself includes a wide variety of loan words, not only French or Spanish ones, but also Portuguese, Dutch, Indic, and indigenous loan words. They cover a wide range of topics, and such a factor is of great significance for the study of West Indian literature on the part of both secondary and tertiary level students and teachers. How is the student, or indeed the teacher who has no background or very little background in foreign languages, to find out the meaning of such words if there is no reference work to guide them? Think of a work like Belizean Z. Ejeu's Bekalam, which is a set text for the CXC examination in English literature. How would a CXC student preparing the text for his or her examination know the meanings of words like bollos, tamales, and relleno, for example, or punta, except there's a reference word to guide that student and to tell him or her that a punta is a dance, that tamales and relleno are typical Belizean dishes. Such words are a part of both our physical and our cultural environment. Indeed, having made reference to these loanwords, I cannot but observe that in our education system, unfortunately, the tendency is there for there to be a great gulf fixed between teachers of English and teachers of foreign languages, when really our only concern should be the effective teaching of language across the board. For we have a language situation in the Caribbean which impacts considerably and in special ways on the teaching and learning of all languages, whether English or foreign languages, and the nature of which should be studied by all language teachers. But to continue, I now proceed to a definition of the supplement. The supplement is a selected listing of about 30 pages of items of flora and fauna, taken from the main dictionary, in which each one is marked with an asterisk. But in actual fact, those 30 pages represent about 8 to 10 times that amount of material because of the cross-referencing system of the main work. A brief example should suffice, namely that if I perhaps take a very high-frequency word, such as eggplant, used generally in the Caribbean, and which is boulanger or boulanger in Guyana, Barbados, and in other Caribbean territories, that word, or primary allonym or name, eggplant, has about 20 secondary allonyms or other names across the territories of the English-speaking Caribbean, and all such items are identifiable by their scientific names. When the user looks in the supplement for boulanger, it will not be there, but when he or she looks for boulanger in the main dictionary, he will see the word eggplant in small capitals, preceded by bold parallel bars. The user will then look up eggplant, which is marked by an asterisk in the main dictionary to indicate that it is in the supplement, and under eggplant there will be a listing of all the other names for the same fruit, each one territorially labeled. The user then goes to the supplement where eggplant will be found, and the French and Spanish equivalents for that item, which are also territorially identified, will be the same equivalents for all the 20 other names found on the eggplant. The supplement therefore underlines and gives additional support to the integrative thrust of the main dictionary. Consequently, the supplement should also be of considerable use, not only to the educational system, but also to tourist and trade sectors, for we need to be able to describe our environment, our birds, our fruits, our flowers, our fish, our insects, in the two other major official languages of our region, French and Spanish, for the benefit of tourists visiting our shores who speak these languages, and indeed for the benefit of those engaging in trade. Indeed, let me now point out that the multilingual supplement to the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage is only a beginning, for it is intended that the supplement be expanded into a Caribbean multilingual dictionary in English, French, and Spanish, dealing not only with flora and fauna, but also with the total reality of Caribbean life, with foods, festivals, household items, games, weather, customs, dances, and so on. In addition to individual items, the multilingual dictionary will also contain the idioms and phrases related to the topics identified. This work is already in train, but can only come to fruition if it is given support on the widest possible scale. For to realize it, work must be undertaken across the language barriers in order to produce an authentic multilingual reference, which will be of considerable use, not only in education, but also in tourism, in trade, in business. Indeed, in all those domains which go to make up our multifaceted culture. That is why regional support is needed in order to make the work possible. For if we are serious about integration, if we intend not to be left behind in the world of the 21st century, characterized by huge trading blocks, as it already is and will continue to be. And I refer to the recently inaugurated Association of Caribbean States, to which our Secretary General has referred earlier in his talk. We must equip ourselves with the necessary skills to do this. And since no human activity can take place without language, which we take so much for granted, and to which our attitude is so cavalier, my appeal to you tonight is for full support of the continuance of this work, of which the supplement, as I said, is but a beginning. I send out this appeal region-wide, especially as we have with us the most senior representatives of ministries of education from the entire region, in the hope that your full support will indeed be forthcoming, and that through that support, in a few years' time, the Caribbean Multilingual Dictionary and the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage will be able to stand side by side as lasting symbols of true Caribbean unity. Thank you.
Your Excellency, the Acting Governor General and Lady Williams, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Secretary General, Sir Keith Hunt, Your Excellencies, the High Commissioner and ambassadors, members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, and my family. I hope, Madam Chairman, you would forgive me if I embarrass the protocol recognized on such occasions, and I refer also to Madam Minister, by perhaps exceeding the length of the keynote address, because there are certain things some things I ought to say. That is to say, I shouldn't fail to mention. There are other things I ought to say. That is to say, in duty bound, I should say. And then there are other things I ought to say, because it best befits me, so to say. Those are three contours of the same sentence, which serve to remind me of the remark of Britain's unforgettable wartime leader, that the ordinary English sentence is an able thing, best left to speak for itself. This he said to a rather uncivil servant. I must thank you, Madam Minister, for your much treasured address. I hope it will be published and I'll be able to refer to it. I think that there are so many things, kind things, and meaningful things that have been said tonight that I would wish to have them noted by regional representatives and other persons of influence here. I must say that I have long known, taught by the good example of my parents, that if God does not come first, he may well not come at all. And so when my friend the Archdeacon spoke tonight and reminded me and told us all that this is his third prayer for and about the project, I would wish to say that in the days of stress, when we really, Jeanette and I, felt very worried about the prospect of continuance, we did ask what he was then Canon Jimmy Springer, our rector, to come and say prayers at the office. And the fact that that dictionary is there today is proof that when in distress we called and the Almighty came to our rescue. let those who would make light or not of the efficacy of the spiritual dimension, let them do so, but I can proclaim the power of prayer. I wish to thank my family, from Marie, Sophia, John, Lisa, and I had asked Wilton Angoy, who is the oldest member of the family here in Barbados and the youngest cousin of my mother, but he can't be here, for their tolerance, because I had to deny them the game after dinner or some other kind of manifestation of a parental duty and love. They knew the love was there, but when I couldn't play cricket in the yard or whatever, or Scrabble, they treated me with, without discontent for my neglect. Thank you all for this. Then, among the things I must say is that there are people here present who I would wish to recognize, because one speaks of helpers, and I want to say that there are some people I'd like you to recognize. Where's Audrey? Where's Audrey Burrows? She was my research assistant for 8 years, until she went back to teaching. She's now head of the English department of her school. Mr. George Money, I saw come in. I'm not sure where he is. There is. Was the first member of the private sector, as we call them, to show his voluntary interest and persuade Barclays Bank, of which he was director, regional director, to fund me to the tune of about £7,800, which was a lot of money in those days. Now the pound is stuttering, but then the pound was really a pound. Pat Simmons, is Pat here? Pat, who sent the girls of the 5th form to help me with the task of excerption and during the Easter holidays, and that was a great help. And of course, Pat has always been helpful in other ways. And I wouldn't say finally, but very importantly, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Ms. Billy Miller, who, as Minister of Education, was the first ever to ask for assistance in the international forums of UNESCO and other places, and took the precaution of sending me her speech to show that she hadn't just promised, but she had actually kept her promise. I see that it would perhaps be inappropriate to ask the present minister to follow in her footsteps, because she seems to have hurt her foot. I'd also like to thank the UWI of Cave Hill for providing the locus of my activities and the advantage of having a number of Eastern Caribbean students, and then the Faculty of Law bringing in all the rest of the Caribbean, and so allowing me to cover the whole Caribbean and have from their talk a resource that was quite incomparable. Then there are things I ought to say as in duty bound. Thanks for the visionary leadership of particularly 3 men, Forbes Burnham, who may have fallen from grace in his latter days, but certainly ordained, as it was the wont of his style of leadership, that I be funded to the tune of what eventually was $103,000 US over a period of 5 years. And that permitted me to carry out the teacher workshops virtually throughout the Caribbean, those 22 states referred to and 38 workshops in them, 7 in Guyana, 4, 5, 6 in Jamaica, and so on, 3, 4 in the Bahamas, where the islands are scattered. That sort of help is most practical. His friend Errol Barrow, also, who helped with funds in Barbados, and the assistance of the Ministry of Education, loaning me Audrey. Then Aston Preston, the late Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies, who we were very afraid of when he first assumed office, because he was a financier and he was always rather rough with academics coming to ask for money. He had a sign on his door when he was bursar which said, "You can ask for anything." And that was full stop. Of course, the idea of the dictionary was mine alone, but it could not be executed by myself alone. Perhaps this is the best time to refer to an award, I suppose I must say, I received from the University of Ghana, sent through my brother Bertie, who is the Consul General of Ghana. And when they heard in 1992 that Oxford University Press had received the manuscript, and in fact had sent out a flyer saying that the book was coming out in 1993, they made this award, which has an inscription in the front there that says, "One head cannot hold a conference," hence 3 heads. And this refers, therefore, to the fact that I needed assistance. I must be having assistance. I must have had assistance to produce this work. And I thought I'd bring it tonight because it was a little premature at the time. It's now 3 years old, and that's because Oxford wasn't as prompt in the delivery as they had said they would be. Many helpers are unavoidably absent because they are tending the Elysian fields. I think particularly of 2 Bajans, Erica Pyle and her son Kenneth Pyle, both now, as I say, gone to the great beyond, but they could be relied upon to answer almost any question put by me on the folk usage, and sometimes to tell me where I could perhaps go and find a corn jar and the idiom associated with it. How he look, he put it on in an empty corn jar, meaning that a man had married a woman without any financial resources. Or what is a freight cart? Or what was a parapet roof? They would tell you what these things are and guide you to find them. Next, I must thank Barbados as being a most fitting place, as it is the mother country of English in the Caribbean, and is a very good operations base with communication easy and plenty of facility. This the equilibrium and peace of the place. I'm Guyanese, and I'm sure that if I were in Guyana, the turmoil in which I would have been socially and spiritually embroiled would not have permitted me to produce this work. I must thank Barbados and the Cave Hill campus for the peace in which I was able to live and work, because scholarship is a very silent pursuit, and noise or turbulence would inhibit its success. But there could be considerable growth if this island were not to be afflicted by narrow-mindedness, its people, or Kabbalistic decision-making, or a persistent enslavement to the notion that reverence is only due to and intellectual help must properly be sought from Europe and North America. We have to open our minds and look much further, or much more deeply, I should say, at our own thing. Perhaps this is best illustrated by a story I shall tell again, of two Italian construction workers high up above Toronto, Pietro and Roberto, shall we call them. And Pietro says to Roberto, "Roberto, what do you do in the night?" He says, "Oh, I stay home with my bambini and my family. I love to stay home." "Oh, but Roberto, you're missing a lot. I go to night school. Do you know who is Garibaldi?" "No." "Great liberator, fighter. Do you know who's Giuseppe Verdi?" "No, I don't know." "Great composer. Must know. Wonderful. Do you know who's Marconi?" No, I don't know." He says, "Great inventor of wonderful Italy we come from. You know who's Buonarroti?" He said, No, I don't know. But you tell me something. You know who is Macaroni Joe?" He says, "Roberto, look, I'm telling you knowledge. You're telling me you rubbish. You're talking big bad joke." He said, No. You see, Macaroni Joe, you should know. Because every time you go to night school, Macaroni Joe is the man who visits your wife. The moral of the story is that whereas many elegant facets of the established cultures of Europe and wherever else over and away are well worthy of note, it is not only rather important to know what's going on at home, but it's no damn joke. Then there are things I ought to say, as it best befits me to say. This book identifies, inventories, chronicles, an extension to British and American English in our own right. In the 9th edition of the Concise Oxford there, you will find, if you look, that the word bad now has two, a superlative and a comparative and superlative, badder and baddest, meaning excellent, very good, even better. It is attributed to American usage, but of course, it's been ours as well. And I've got a pretty full reference to bad, badder, baddest there in my dictionary long before the COD9 came out. But that sort of extension is now acknowledged internationally there. And I'll give you another one, rather more pertinent to our own experience. In 1987, the Honorable Chief Justice of Barbados, who's now our acting Governor General, handed down a judgment against a certain person who shall not be named, but he was kind enough to inform me when I inquired that any judgment of the court is public property, and so I was able to go and collect from his own hand the judgment, all of which I shall not read, but it was about the use of the word to bull. And there was learned argument on both sides to show that one, the word was offensive, and the other, that it was not offensive. This went on for a couple of days with learned counsel expatiating upon the subject. His Lordship, in handing down his judgment, said, just briefly here, it's a long judgment, "I hold the natural and obvious meaning, that the natural and obvious meaning of those words to bull and buller to a Barbadian audience is that the plaintiff engaged in homosexual activity seemed to cover what his Lordship said a quite obvious reading of such a word. Indeed, they would have seen that as a verb, tabul, in sense number 2, has the meaning which would allow His Holiness the Pope, whenever the Spirit took him, tabul. Next, and I'm talking about and of course, His Lordship has supplied me from this judgment, which was 1987, and in time for my going to press, to use the citation from his judgment to authenticate the meaning. So John, of the Oxford English Dictionary, I don't have to have recourse to my membership of your board to invite you to take this new census number 4, but you have the authority vested in you by His Excellency from his own judgment. Next, I'd like you to look at your programs at this illustration, which is another dimension of what we call an extension of the English language, is much more implied. You see 2 pictures and some words in between, and the story is this. What we call, and look at the words, what we call a cutlass is called a Collins in Barbados, it's called a gilpin in Trinidad, it's called also a sword in Barbados, a ponya, I forget where, I think probably Tobago, a machete in many places, and then I've drawn a line on cane billers below. I suspected that gilpin must have been the name of a British manufacturer or an American manufacturer. So I started with the British possibility by asking the British High Commission at the time to help me to find whether there was a manufacturer of things like the cutlass. And this is what I received in reply. It took 3 months from sending out the letter to receiving an answer. And those of you who wonder why the dictionary took so long can have that as a kind of example. The 3 months were well spent waiting on what is excellent information, and there is a firm of William Gilpin and Sons that made the weapons that you see below there and supplied them to the British Empire at the time. The firm had been going from 1763 onwards, and this was a catalogue picture of 1839, and it was found by the Tools and Trades Historical Society at Swanley in Kent. And you can understand how much inquiry and research must have gone on in England without my knowing it, just for them to send me this information. And you can see the number of different kinds of weapons that were available. More interesting for me is the fact that one researcher found 54 different names for this implement in Jamaica. This dictionary has about 8. So you see how much more work there is to be done ahead of us. Most interesting for me is that the little hooked bills that you see at the bottom are called cane bills. Now, let me be quick about this because it could go on into a whole lesson. But the suggestion in the shape of a halberd, which you see the yeomen of the guard of the Tower of London carrying over their shoulders, there's just a suggestion, is a real connection. The Old English word for a halberd was bill, B-I-L-L, so that this hooked implement is 1,000 years old as a word. And the laborer who holds that in his hand and cuts cane has got a tradition of history behind that none of us would be aware of. So I'm saying that plus the picture on the other side, the weed, which I would introduce to you as Man Piaba, of the song Man Piaba, Woman Piaba, Tan Tan Palbak, and so on. This is the weed which has a lot of amusing stories and some rather unpleasant, or at least the names, such names as I don't think I could very well explain to an audience of polite persons. And this Leonotis depetifolia of the family Labiatae lamiaceae is the weed. And for me to write a definition, I have to find this sort of thing out, and luckily some people like Honeychurch of Dominica have done work on that would help to identify precisely. And then there are other persons at the at St. Augustine who were doing work on folk medicines and those that were toxic or not. I'll have to leave that alone and say that if you look at the British heritage and the ecological dimension provided on these 2 pages, you will see how much is to be researched, how much is to be learned in this venture of merely making a proper inventory of our environment and culture. The need is for an Institute of Caribbean and Latin American Studies where we can embrace the study of folklore, anthropology, festivals, music, dance, belief systems. All these things need to be studied, but a university cannot afford departments to do all these things. I'm sure that they should be encapsulated in one, under one umbrella, capsulated umbrella, not perhaps a very good metaphor, but they should certainly be covered and provided with a place of study. But you know, I don't think we recognize what we are. African, East Indian, I call Indic because you've got Muslim, Hindu, European, Amerindian, Chinese, the Amerindian forgotten or ignored. We call ourselves Caribbean, you know, but the only Caribbean place is Guyana, where there are real Caribs. In the rest of these islands, we don't have Caribbean people. When you saw my wife a while ago, there's an unquestioned dominance of Africa in her appearance. But the keener eye would have detected an Amerindian embrace somewhere in the timberland of her ancestry. Perhaps she's more Caribbean than most of us. But the real point is that we are so mixed. We've got so many elements mixed in us everywhere that the nations may well sit up and say to the rest of the world, this is some people. But nations don't behave like that. Instead, the more powerful tend to assert themselves and dominate the unempowered. And we unempowered have to save ourselves and must do so by preserving our culture. There's a Swahili proverb which I put at the beginning of the book, which says, the beginning of wisdom is knowing who you are. I would almost say, with a little change, the beginning of our salvation is knowing who we are. That is why this book has carefully and respectfully tried to shape an instrument of integrative education, needing a home base now. And I see that as an Institute of Caribbean and Latin American Studies, as a prelude to the necessary understanding that must enlighten the intelligent brotherhood that is needed to cement our societies, which are torn apart by politics, racism, class, opportunism, crab barrelism. From Guyana up through the islands north and west. That is our condition. This instrument was first conceived by me simply as an explanatory device for teaching boys in Guyana, where I found that we would say to trouble, don't trouble by books, but British English would not permit that. We would say that when you pelted a brick, you would be pelting a stone, and Oxford and Cambridge would have marked down such usage which is Guyanese standard English as not acceptable in Britain. So we started out like that, and gradually it grew, and I joined the university in 1963, met students, as I said, and then 1971 came the chance through the Ford Foundation, and I'm glad that Sir Keith told you some of the history there, so I can skip it, but thanks are due to all those sources. And then there came the time when a certain lady joined my household, and I introduced her to lexicography, and she took to it like a banana quit to bananas. And that togetherness has borne much fruit. I think we can change using inclusive language, one of the well-known aphorisms, and say that together with every successful spouse, there's a good spouse. Now, the coincidence of a husband and wife team is a rare thing. Here, see if I can get this thing working. Over here, can you hear me? Yes. We've got husband and wife team producing the Australian National Dictionary. A husband and wife team producing the South African English, the Dictionary of South African English. We've got husband and wife teams working in Spanish, and it's unusual, and it's an opportunity to be caught and used or to be lost. I'm afraid I turn this thing off. Some people don't see things that way, but I'm sure that we must use the value that accidentally is offered by the fact that I work with my wife and she wants to work with me, and we can help each other to produce not only that, but much more to come. Now, dictionaries weren't always like that. At the end there was the great dictionary of Dr. Johnson. And I would like to draw attention to this. I hope I shan't cause an explosion somewhere. This is the great dictionary. I am a lexicophile. I collect dictionaries. And this is a facsimile edition of the great dictionary of Dr. Johnson, published in 1755. And the only Caribbean entry in it is Barbados. He's got a definition of Barbados cherry and says that this tree can grow to 15 feet in the West Indies, but in Europe it's a curiosity, full stop. Dr. Johnson had no use for the language of the laboring classes. And he said so very definitely that that was so undesirable that they should be persuaded to perish, allowed to perish, and persuaded to do so. So far from that position is what we see over here, where Oxford University Press and these others are showing that the expansion of language goes from the roots right to the top, from talk to writing. And I draw to your attention just as a matter of fact that there are people who, recognizing that they are a part of civilization and that they must assert their own part in that civilization, have produced dictionaries such as you see there, and as you hear, the South Africans are producing another one, bigger, But observe that the Caribbean English Dictionary is ahead of India, ahead of West Africa. We are ahead of New Zealand, which is still producing its own dictionary. It's going to be published, but ours is already done. So we have got a head start, which we must not allow to slip from us. You see, that 20-volume thing there started in 1854, and the first volume was published in 1884. 30 years. Mind you, it's a bigger work. And the fact that we've got, and this was the work of the great Sir James Murray, I think it's a tremendous privilege to have his successor and heir, John Simpson, with us tonight. I felt particularly honored when I heard that no lesser a person than he would be coming to our launching. And I welcome with him Ms. Bridget West, who is the managing director of the marketing division. So she's a divisional director. So we've got two persons from Oxford University Press here. Just to say that in the matter of what kind of English it is, I have said that this book must stand not instead of, I've said this on the radio several times, but side by side with the Concise Oxford Dictionary, because we claim all that is there, plus ours. And that we range from the least, rather, should we say the most stigmatized, if you like, the least accredited, to the most high. So that whereas some might like to quote Robert Burns in something like the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, with the Scottish dialect, I like to remember the old lady who, having heard about the breakdown of an impending marriage, said, well, y'all can plan up, but all can still mash up. Which means the same thing, and is put more cryptically. Now, I said that Johnson had no room, no time for the language of the masses of the lower or social orders. But we know better today. Without a presentation of the whole gamut of language, we are not doing the job. No lexicographer today needs to be reminded of that at all. Observe, though, that even so great a person as Noah Webster began with extreme caution. He set the pace for American English to call itself American English, but he did not. And the first edition of his dictionary, although it was not the first print, I have collected there, and you can't quite see it, but I think afterwards you might. It's the second dictionary there, and he calls it an American dictionary of the English language. And he very carefully explains in his preface that he did not want to, as it were, counter British English, but to observe that there were extensions of the English language through culture and ecology in America that needed to be recorded also in English. In effect, that's partly what I'm doing here, but he was a very careful man. And it is that tradition which has been continued with the Dictionary of American Regional English. And you can see Newfoundland English, and Canadian English, and lots of other Englishes. These are people who take themselves seriously and empower their own imaginations and their own culture by recording it, making a proper inventory and chronicle of it. We have a greater need to do that because we are small people, demographically, but intellectually we are much greater than we would allow ourselves to recognize. I therefore I'm very concerned about what I see developing. I'll tell you in a minute. But before that, two reflections. When William Shakespeare, whose birthday it is today, 23rd of April, wrote his plays, and when King James ordained that the Bible should be translated for the benefit of the subjects into what was then plain English, and authorized 54 scholars who worked 2.5 years at it. Shakespeare died 1616. The English Bible was produced in 1611, and at that time there was no English dictionary. Those men worked, certainly Shakespeare and all of them, the 54, without recourse to a dictionary. There was none. It was their command of language that served them. And it is also, it carries the message that language and people come first, the dictionary after. It's a record of what people say. And we mustn't forget that. That is what the DCEU attempts to do. It is how we speak, how we look at ourselves, and that is what we must use to save ourselves when people wish to pull us down. The next reflection is that this is the Frank Collymore Hall, and Frank Collymore was working independently of Richard Allsopp when he produced the Glossary of Barbadian, Notes for a Glossary of Barbadian Dialect, published in 1955. I had begun in 1949 collecting without any intention of publishing a glossary, but after Seymour drew to my attention that there was a man called Frank Collymore in Barbados, and we began to correspond, and we never met until I came to Barbados in 1963. He died in 1977, I think. But the point to be noted is that Frank Collymore looked beyond Barbados. He established linkages with scholars, writers outside of Barbados, and gave them an opportunity to publish through BIM. It is that sort of outlook that I would wish to urge upon us, and to say that we have not done enough to do honor to our own culture. You know, there is in Berlin a Gesellschaft für Karibik Forschung, if I pronounce it correctly, Society for Caribbean Research. In Utrecht, in Holland, a Center for Caribbean and Latin American Studies. In Warwick, Britain, a Center for Caribbean Studies. In Florida, Gainesville, in USA, an Institute of Caribbean and Latin Studies. In Puerto Rico, there a home, an Institute of Caribbean Studies. But no such thing exists. It's talked about. None in our own university, although people do invite people like myself to go and talk to them. In short, they pay for us to sell our culture to them. And why not? They're enlightened enough to say that is fine with the Caribbean, but people are doing. I mean, I don't know that the Russians have done anything about it, but I won't be surprised if they hadn't in the days when they had money. What I am pointing out is that, what I'm pointing to is my grave concern that we are hearing of a push for the reggae studies in Jamaica, carnival studies in Trinidad, cricket studies and popular culture in Barbados. And none of those would seem to pay sufficient attention to the intellectual dimension. Not that reggae, cricket, and carnival do not involve intellect, far be it from me to say so. But if you think about it, each one of those is celebrating the black man's or the Caribbean man's physique, his reggae, his carnival, and his cricket, foot play, and so on. The purely intellectual such as represented by the achievement of Suki King, is ignored, put aside, despised, certainly not sufficiently recognized to let one feel that the Caribbean people have respect for the intellectual dimension of their own folk, notwithstanding the fact that we have prize-winning poets and acclaimed writers. George Lamming sits there, Kamal Brathwaite, a Nobel Prize winner. And as I've said, as John Simpson said, there's 1,009 references all to written sources in this book. Why is it that we allow ourselves to be smitten? We are smitten. I don't know whether we allow ourselves to be smitten, but we are smitten with the same fragmentary approach to culture or to development of cultural activities that bedevil our efforts to federate or to integrate. It's the same thing, and I do not see that we should do other than attempt to embrace all these pursuits that I referred to under an umbrella covering the University of West Indies 3 campuses and the University of Guyana, where we have affinities that are not to be doubted. So I am very strongly appealing to those here present. I know there are no millionaires here, but we have the millions or the treasure in our intellectual capacity. And I'm appealing to the entire Caribbean community to pay more serious attention to the development of Caribbean studies, because only thus will we be able to save the splits and divisions taking place in Guyana, Trinidad, threatening us all. You know why Yugoslavia has ceased to exist? Because they fooled themselves that they didn't need to attend to matters of culture, and that is what split them apart in the most brutal way. The more highly admired Canada is in trouble because it's almost too late to address the problem of an integrated Caribbean culture, bringing together the French and Anglophone elements. That is not a light matter. And if we fail to use the opportunity of providing a home for this book and what it means, not a palace in which it will disport itself, but a home of which it will be one member of a family of researchers into all aspects of our Caribbean life, we shall have failed to use the best opportunities that there are, while admittedly older persons like myself and George Lamming and others continue to exist. To reach 70 years and 10 is a gift for chosen men. Time beyond must then be spent using that gift with choice intent. And if we are thwarted, or if we keep crying and people go in the direction of studies that glorify the Caribbean body and do not pay tribute, attention, and respect for the existence of the Caribbean intellect as such, we shall have failed in our duty to our children. Let that not be.
you.